Hi everyone. Many of you have reached out to ask me if I was going to do a new Millennium Tower video update anytime soon, and here it is. I've been waiting for additional developments to materialize, and Millennium Tower is back in the news, and of course it's not good, as usually is the case here. Here's an article that just came out a few days ago. Condo prices at beleaguered Millennium Tower dropped to as low as $649,000. Now I'm going to drill down on this, but the purpose of this video is to provide a quick summary. I don't want to repeat a lot of what I've discussed in previous videos, but I know there's a lot of new viewers to this channel. And essentially what I want to do here is lay the groundwork for why there really needs to be a truly independent engineering review done related to the building and in particular its foundation relative to what's been going on, not just since the beginning of construction, but since this so-called repair work was completed last summer in 2023. My previous video on the Millennium Tower was done in March of 2024, and it got a lot of interest. Now let's go back and look at the details associated with this headline. At the beleaguered Millennium Tower, which has made headlines across the country ever since the public found out it was sinking in 2016, a condominium was recently listed for $649,000. A precipitous 41% drop from its $1.1 million sale price a decade ago. It's not the only condo that's seen a significant drop in valuation either. A two-bedroom unit that sold for $1.5 million in 2015 is now on the market for $800,000, a 47% drop, Zillow listings show. Now I'm going to go into more detail on this, but the thing to remember is that this remedial pile installation that was completed in June of 2023 involved the installation of 18 perimeter pile. It was done to stabilize the real estate prices for these units. The engineers involved assured the city that in fact nothing needed to be done to arrest the settlement and tilt of the building, but they were going to do something just to restore confidence in the people who own the units and might want to buy units in the future. Well, that clearly hasn't worked. And this has been an ongoing trend. Here's a previous article. Through an inspection by the city in 2017 showed that Millennium Tower is safe to occupy. The situation has motivated some people to bail out. Residents previously said they sold their homes short of what they paid for them, with about 100 condos falling $320,000 in value on average in 2017. So you can see the situation hasn't gotten any better. Now, I thought I'd look into whether this drop in unit values for this condominium building in San Francisco is something specific to the Millennium Tower, or is a broad indication with what's going on with the real estate market, the residential market in particular in San Francisco. So the Millennium Tower in San Francisco is a 605-foot, 58-story building with the antenna spire raises the height to 645 feet, and there are a total of 419 residential units in the Millennium Tower. Now let's look at this information from Ruby Home real estate site. I'll put links in the description for key sources of information that I've used in this video. So right now there's 14 units listed, which has pretty much been the case for a couple of years now. It says average days on market, 122 days. That doesn't mean necessarily how long it takes to sell a unit. If people give up after a while and take it off the market, then that would be how long it was on the market from the time it was listed before the time it was taken off. Then you have average dollars per square foot at $1,100. And the median list price is $1.4 million. Now let's contrast that to the Avery, another high-end residential building just around the corner from Millennium Tower. The Avery has 547 units at 56 stories. It was built in 2019. Millennium Tower was completed in 2009. And we see for the Avery, there's only 7 units that are listed. Similar average number of days on the market, which is 128. Average price per square foot is over $1,700, which is $600 more than the Millennium Tower. And the median list price is $2.3 million. So let's just show you the location of the Avery relative to the Millennium Tower. So I thought I'd look into whether the price drops at the Millennium Tower were reflective of the overall market. So I found this source from the Federal Reserve. The baseline index of 100 corresponds to the year 2000. And you can see right now, at the end of 2024, the index is 280. So 2.8 times the value in 2000. And it shows overall pretty steady increases. Now, the Millennium Tower, as I mentioned, was completed in 2009. You would have expected steady increases in prices, and instead they've gone down nearly 40%. And if you adjust for inflation, a much higher percentage drop in the value of these units. So I think you could pretty well indicate that there's something going on with the Millennium Tower that isn't going on with other residential buildings in the city of San Francisco. And of course, we know this to be the case. I just wanted to be objective about it and look at it from a data-driven standpoint. And it's also costing local governments a tremendous amount of lost tax revenue in terms of property taxes. If we look at an assessed value of $1.1 million, the county taxes would be a little over $7,300 a year. But if you drop that down to $649,000, it's $4,300 a year. So $3,000 less property tax a year because of the decrease in value. Now, again, I was going to go over a couple of highlights here. The Millennium Tower was opened in 2009. Construction began in 2005. Originally, a total settlement of the foundation was expected to be in the range of 4 to 6 inches. And by 2009, it was already nearly 10 inches. In June of 2023, at the time they completed the installation of this 18 perimeter piling, the Millennium Tower was leaning more than 29 inches at its northwest corner and had a total amount of settlement, of maximum settlement, of 18 inches. Now, the original foundation consisted of nearly 1,000 14-inch square concrete pile, and they were driven to depths of 60 to 90 feet below the surface to rest in a marine sand layer. The piling didn't go all the way to bedrock. And even at the time of construction, there was a lot of buzz about this building being the tallest reinforced concrete structure in California. And a very tall reinforced concrete structure imparts a tremendous amount of loading to the foundation, more so than a structural steel building would of similar height. Here's a profile of what we're talking about. The original piling for the Millennium Tower rested in this orange layer, which is the marine sands. And below that, you have these marine clay layers that are subject to consolidation settlement with increases in effective stress in the soil layers, either through dewatering or through the imposition of additional foundation loadings, which is what happened. We could see that essentially all these closely spaced concrete pile for the original foundation acted as a equivalent mat, if you remember from Terzaghi and Peck. And you can see a stress distribution, a Boussinesque stress distribution, stress bulb below that foundation where you're imparting significant percentage of the applied loading well within these clay layers. So it's not surprising that the amount of settlement would be high due to soil consolidation. And just as a refresher, these concrete pile are what is known as friction pile in that they don't have a tip bearing in a very hard or dense layer. Unlike an end-bearing pile, where in this case it's bearing on either very hard clay, dense sands and gravels, or bedrock. So a structural engineering firm, Simpson, Gumpertz, and Hager, they came up with a design on behalf of the developer, and later they continued their work on the project to come up with a perimeter pile installation of 52 pile. And these pile were going to be attached to the outside of the mat foundation, and then the pile would go on down to the bedrock to transfer the soil to the bedrock instead of the clay layers above the bedrock. This is what this trench looks like. You see these loading frames. Essentially, they're designed to float up and down over the piling, so they're not transferring additional loading to the foundation. Just a few photos of that installation. And as I mentioned, the structural engineer lead on this project was an engineer named Ron Hamburger, and I'll cover more about him here in a moment. So the stated objectives for installation of these 52 pile was to install new foundation elements extending to bedrock to remove sufficient stress from these marine clay layers underlying Millennium Tower foundation to arrest settlement and tilt as a result of consolidation settlement of these soils. Assure that the building can provide the seismic performance intended of new structures designed to the San Francisco Building Code, and improve the seismic performance of the foundation. Okay, so those are the stated goals. At the end of their study, they concluded that the seismic response for the building Considering settlement is essentially the same as that neglecting it, and I know a lot of people are skeptical about that conclusion. Building essentially meets criteria for new buildings designed using performance-based procedure. Well, it doesn't meet the building code in San Francisco explicitly because of the amount of existing tilt. The settlement has not substantially affected the building's adequacy. And again, there are a number of engineers who have publicly stated that they strongly disagree with that conclusion. Mr. Hamburger goes on to say, we conducted the analysis presented in this report to determine a structurally safe level of acceptable additional building settlement and tilt that will not compromise the ability of the existing building to resist a major earthquake. We conclude that the building can withstand a tilt to the west of approximately 79 inches and a tilt to the north of approximately 33 inches and remain structurally safe, even when subjected to the maximum considered earthquake shaking as defined in ASCE 7-16. Again, you'll find many other engineers who will dispute that 79 inches of building tilt is a acceptable outcome. Hamburger said that outside of addressing the sinking and tilting issues, the project also made the structure more earthquake resistant. As part of the building permit process imposed by San Francisco, the tower is subject to a 10-year monitoring plan with surveying and measurements periodically recorded and sent to city officials. Hamburger made a statement to SF Gate that he maintains that the building is stable and safe and the current work is not even needed from a technical perspective. The HOA has always made clear that although the voluntary upgrade was not required, it is interested in restoring the building's reputation, damaged primarily by erroneous media reports, Hamburger said. I mean, to me, that's really interesting. This is what I would refer to as a political repair. I've seen this with other foundations, other structures, where the owner has mandated that the contractor implement some kind of repair, and those involved from a technical side knew that either the repair wasn't necessary or the repair that was mandated wasn't going to change the actual condition of the foundation. But yet, with the contractor following the direction of the owner accepted the installation and the project moved on. So extra work was done, extra money was spent, and they could get on with life, whether or not that so-called fix had any technical merit. Now, the interesting thing about this project is, unlike 80 Natomas, which was a similarly designed reinforced concrete residential structure about the same height as Millennium Tower, the city of San Francisco required an independent review of the foundation design, and the late Chuck Ladd from MIT wrote a letter saying that, hey, this building is going to settle excessively. And so the city of San Francisco ultimately pulled their permit for the construction of that building. But mere months later, they granted a permit to Millennium Tower, very close by to 80 Natomas, similar subsurface conditions, similar foundation loading, similar design of having piling not going all the way to bedrock, as was the case with 80 Natomas. And yet the city did not require any independent engineering review. Now, some of you in comments to previous videos have alleged that there's has been a lot of corruption in the San Francisco building department, and they've certainly weathered their share of scandals, and they've had previous directors resign. They recently had an instance where a city building inspector was inspecting property that either he owned or relatives owned. It's just not a good situation. So to what extent that factored into the decision-making process, I couldn't tell you. But back in 2017, the city required what they called an independent review of the situation, and this was of the building settlement and tilt prior to the installation of these remediation pile. As I mentioned, that was completed in 2023. Now I'm going to come back to this independent review because there's been other engineers that have been highly critical of not only the findings but the methodology that was used to compile this report, which in essence said everything's good. Then there was a study published last year through ASCE entitled "The Foundation Settlement and Tilt of Millennium Tower in San Francisco, California." And as I've mentioned in previous videos, this paper did not delve whatsoever into the original design errors that most people agree occurred with putting such a massively loaded foundation on pile that didn't go all the way to bedrock, and in fact terminated such that they're going to produce significant loadings on a marine clay layer and initiate primary and secondary consolidation settlement. Now, this study was commissioned by the developer, so I can't imagine the developer had too much interest in having a paper written about how he and his geotechnical engineers messed up with their decision making in terms of the type of building and foundation. Instead, this paper focused on the dewatering that was associated with adjacent construction and essentially blame that for the building's problems. Again, neglecting the issues with the original design. Now, there have been a number of interviews with both geotechnical and structural engineers from local media in San Francisco, and they've been highly critical about what's happened with this building once the news became public about the settlement issues as well as how to deal with them. And there were two key letters that were written, one in 2019, another in 2022, by Carden and Karp. Lawrence Karp is a geotechnical engineer that's worked for decades in the Bay Area. And then Josh Carden is a structural engineer, again with decades of experience in this region. And they wrote some pretty strongly worded letters critical of the plans for installing these perimeter piling. They warned that it was going to cause additional building settlement and tilt, which is exactly what happened. But their warnings went unheeded. And again, in 2022, they wrote another letter summarizing their situation. They did this as a public service. The letters were sent to the City and County of San Francisco Board of Supervisors. And in this second letter, they strongly recommended that an independent assessment be made of the Millennium Tower. Now, Mr. Karp has posted a wealth of information related to the Millennium Tower on a website of his. And again, I'll put a link in the description to this website. So this perimeter piling plan involved installation of 52 piling, and because they ended up creating more settlement and tilt of the building by virtue of their design and construction methodologies, they scaled back to essentially a third of the piling, 18 perimeter piling instead of 52. And it ended up costing as much money as they originally forecast. They forecast about $100 million for installing the 52 pile, and actually cost $120 million to put in 18. But I want to read you this quote from Mr. Hamburger. "We did not anticipate the pile installation would cause additional movement, but we were proactive about it," says Hamburger, who halted the repairs voluntarily in August 2021 so the team could develop a revamped pile driving method that would not accelerate settlement. And I've mentioned this before, and I think 100% of the people that commented on this indicated that that is not being proactive, and I would agree, that's being reactive. And I mentioned the $120 million fix. It was $20 million over budget. Last fall, a news story came out where the residents were assessed about $10 a square foot to come up with more money to cover a portion of these cost overruns. So that didn't do much to stabilize the property values, in my opinion. So what do I think should be done now? I think the City of San Francisco Department of Building and Inspection need to commission a truly independent engineering study for the Millennium Tower and its foundation, looking at the history of what's happened, looking at the nature of these remediation pile, the so-called fix of 18 perimeter piling on the northwest corner of the building. Will the building truly perform adequately during an earthquake? How much additional settlement and tilt would be anticipated? I think an independent study would go a long way to assuring the public, and in particular the owners of these units, whether they should stay in this building or not. And in that earlier quote from Hamburger mentioned the monitoring reports. Initially, these monitoring reports were issued weekly. Now they're coming out at essentially 6-week intervals. And these are data-only reports. They record information about piezometer readings, settlement markers, and so on. Now I want to show a quick comparison. The most recent report was issued on June 17th, 2024. And one of the what they call action levels is when the total loading on these 18 perimeter piling drops below 16,200 kips for more than 2 weeks. And based on the downward slope of that total load line, indicating that the load was decreasing steadily over time, I had projected this red line showing that essentially by about this time, you would have expected their action level to have been reached. And instead, the readings suddenly flatten out for the last couple of months. And there's no explanation. As I mentioned, this is a data-only report. So I don't know why that suddenly flattened off. I think it's interesting. It's flattened off at 16,400. And again, their action level's at 16,200 kips. So I think that's rather interesting. So let's compare some readings from June 2024 to mid-December 2023. So that's a 6-month period. These are the contours of settlement based on the readings for these settlement points throughout the foundation of the building. You can see these boxes in the northwest corner. That's the location of these 18 perimeter pile. And this is the plot from the December readings. And so I just calculated the difference between those two readings. So the settlement's increasing, and you could see that the settlement ranges from about 0.02 inches to 0.07 inches, and that's additional movement from December to June of this year. And the higher settlement readings occur near the interior of the foundation. And that's consistent with what was reported a few months ago, that the center of the foundation mat for the Millennium Tower continues to settle. And really that's not very surprising, because even a 10-foot thick reinforced concrete mat would still be expected to behave in a somewhat flexible fashion given its large size. If you had a perfectly rigid foundation, the loading could be evenly distributed across the footprint of the foundation. But when a foundation is flexible, you tend to have higher load concentrations near the center of the foundation. Now, I wanted to go back to this news story about the drop in unit values at the Millennium Tower. This is a real estate agent talking. Generally, Millennium Tower is a fantastic deal right now. And as far as he knows, it has nothing to do with the building's long-winded history of structural defects, because 2 other similar units sold for record lows of $650,000 and $800,000 in 2023 and 2024, respectively. This set a benchmark for pricing other units, he explained. Well, yeah, it's called comps. I mean, you can't sell your house or condo unit for more money than what's the sales price has been for recent units. It says ever since one unit, single bedroom, got listed at $649,000, he's received a tremendous amount of interest. My phone has not stopped ringing. According to Redfin, this price is so low it's slightly below the median sales price of a condo in all of California. Now, following multiple years of construction, 301 Mission is fully anchored to bedrock, with street-side construction activities scheduled to complete Q3 2023. A Sotheby's listing for one penthouse read, as a result, real estate agents like Testa are confident that Millennium is poised for a comeback. There's just nothing else out there that is so uniquely positioned, and the fact that you can pick it up so inexpensively is such a great opportunity, he said. Smart people will realize this. Well, first of all, that's incorrect to say that the building's fully anchored to bedrock. And I'll leave it to you all out there to decide whether that's a good deal or smart people are in fact staying away because they don't know what the future holds for this building. They don't know whether there's going to be future assessments, special assessments to recoup additional costs for repair or monitoring or what have you. So again, I think a fully independent review is long overdue for this building. Now, you could say the 2017 review was independent. Other engineers dispute that, in particular its accuracy or the methodologies used to reach those conclusions. But putting that aside, that 2017 study or evaluation predates these recent remedial efforts, where in the midst of it, building settlement and tilt increased. So again, I think it's past due for an independent engineering review, structural and geotechnical engineering review, be made for the entire situation for the foundation of this building. So let me know what you all think in the comments section. I want to send a shout out to the channel members. I really appreciate your ongoing support. I also want to send a shout out to those of you who have provided super thanks. That's another great way to support the channel. As I mentioned, I've got links to key sources of information related to this topic in the description to this video. I also have links for free digital downloads that I've compiled. One on the biggest civil engineering disasters of the past 100 years, and another summarizing the Artemis program, NASA's plan to return humans to the surface of the moon. Thanks for watching, everyone.